It begins quietly, a drop, a stream. Then, in seconds, a wall of water that rewrites maps. For centuries, humans believed we could control rivers, build walls, build dams, stop nature. But every dam, every levee, is just a promise waiting to be broken. Throughout history, we've stood at the edge of catastrophe, convinced our concrete and steel could hold back the forces that carved the Grand Canyon. We were wrong, again and again and again. In 1889, a dam in Pennsylvania released 20 million tons of water in 10 minutes. In 1963, an Italian mountain collapsed into a reservoir, launching a wave taller than a 70-story building. In 1975, China lost more people to a single dam failure than any disaster in modern history. Yet the world wouldn't know for decades. These aren't ancient myths. These are engineered catastrophes, human decisions written in water. And they're still happening. Stay until the end, because the last flood on this list wasn't caused by nature. It was caused by us. Water doesn't negotiate. It accumulates. It flows. It finds every weakness. A river flood begins with deception, snowmelt in distant mountains, rainfall upstream, runoff collecting in tributaries you've never heard of. For days, sometimes weeks, nothing seems unusual. Then the convergence happens. Scientists measure this in return periods. A 100-year flood means a 1% chance each year. But here's what they won't tell you up front. Climate change has rewritten the rules. What used to happen once a century now happens every decade. The math we built our dams on is obsolete. Just 15 centimeters of moving water can knock down an adult human. 1 meter can move a car like it's made of cardboard. 2 meters, and houses become rafts until they disintegrate. When engineers build a dam, they're making a bet. They're calculating, what's the worst storm nature can throw at us? Then they build for that, plus a safety margin. But nature doesn't read engineering manuals, and humans have a fatal flaw. We underestimate. There's a paradox embedded in every dam ever built. The more we try to control rivers, the more we forget what they're capable of. Communities settle in floodplains that haven't flooded in generations. Cities expand downstream. People build homes in valleys that were once considered death traps. The dam becomes invisible, a background feature, until the day it isn't. We turned rivers into machines and forgot that machines break. May 31st, 1889. Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Population 30,000. A steel town where immigrants, German, Welsh, Scottish, had come to build the future of America. 14 miles upstream, a different kind of community thrived. The South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, a private resort for America's industrial elite. Andrew Carnegie, Henry Clay Frick, Andrew Mellon, names that built empires. They had a lake. A beautiful, massive lake held back by an earthen dam, the largest in the United States at the time. 900 feet long, 72 feet tall. Built originally as part of a canal system, then abandoned when railroads made canals obsolete. The club bought it cheap, modified it, raised it, and critically, removed the discharge pipes that would allow controlled water release. They installed screens across the spillway to keep their stocked fish from escaping. They made it impossible to control the water level. Engineers warned them, local residents worried. The dam had cracked before, been patched before. Everyone downstream had heard the rumors, but nothing ever happened. Until it did. That May was relentless rain, day after day. The Conemaugh River rose, streets flooded. But Johnstown had flooded before. People moved furniture upstairs and waited it out. At the dam, workers frantically piled sandbags. They dug emergency channels. They sent riders downstream with warnings. But the lake was already overflowing. At 3:10 p.m., the center of the dam sagged, then dissolved. 20 million tons of water, the equivalent of Niagara Falls, roared into a valley 40 feet wide in some places. The wall of water reached heights of 60 feet, traveling at 40 miles per hour. Entire towns vanished in minutes. South Fork, Mineral Point, Woodvale. The wave carried houses, locomotives weighing 170,000 pounds, trees, debris, and people. Johnstown had 10 minutes. Eyewitness accounts described the sound first, a rumble like thunder, growing louder. Then screams. Then the water arrived like a moving mountain. 99 entire families were wiped out. 396 children died. Over 700 people were never identified. Their remains buried in a plot called the Unknown. Bodies were found as far away as Cincinnati. As late as 1911, 22 years after the disaster, remains were still being discovered. At the stone bridge where the rivers converged, debris piled 30 acres wide and 30 feet high. Then it caught fire. People who had survived by clinging to wreckage burned to death. 2,209 people died. The South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club faced lawsuits. Every single one was dismissed. The courts ruled it an act of God. No one was held responsible. No one went to jail. No one paid damages. But something changed in America that day. The public rage at wealthy elites who played with lives forced a reckoning. It was the first time Americans confronted the idea that private profit shouldn't come at public risk. It wasn't an act of God. It was an act of arrogance. Henan Province, Central China, 1975. The Banqiao Dam stood as a symbol of new China. Built during the Great Leap Forward with Soviet guidance, it was called the Iron Dam. Unbreakable, designed to survive a once-in-a-thousand-year flood. Chen Xing, one of China's foremost hydrologists, had warned during construction that the design was inadequate. He was ignored, labeled a pessimist, sidelined. The dam was completed in 1952, raised and reinforced in 1956. By 1975, it controlled a reservoir of nearly 400 million cubic meters of water. Tens of thousands of people lived downstream in farming communities that had been built on the promise of flood protection. Then came Typhoon Nina. It hit Taiwan on August 1st, killing 25 and causing widespread damage. Normally, such storms weaken rapidly once they reach the mainland. Nina didn't. It stalled over Henan Province on August 5th, trapped by a cold front from the north. In 3 days, more than 1,000 millimeters of rain fell. A year's worth of rain in 72 hours. In some areas, 7 inches fell in a single hour. At the Banqiao Dam, phone lines went down. No one downstream knew what was happening. The reservoir gates were clogged with silt. Emergency discharge was impossible. The water kept rising. At 1 a.m. on August 8th, a worker reportedly shouted, "Chujiaozi, the river dragon has come." The dam didn't just break, it exploded. 260 million cubic meters of rock and earth, the entire mountain's northern slope, collapsed into the reservoir. The force released nearly 700 million cubic meters of water in 6 hours. A wave over 7 meters high, traveling at 50 kilometers per hour, swept across the valley. It was 10 kilometers wide by the time it reached the city of Suping. The Banqiao Dam wasn't alone. 61 other dams in the region failed that night, each one releasing its contents, each one adding to the destruction. Entire villages disappeared. Dao Wencheng Commune, population 9,600. 0 survivors. The city of Wencheng, half of 36,000 dead. 200,000 people tried to survive by floating on debris in the rushing water. The railroad between Beijing and Guangzhou, the main artery through the region, was destroyed. Upended railcars littered the landscape. Service stopped for 18 days. Then came the aftermath, the real horror. 1,100,000 people were trapped by floodwaters 10 days later. Disease spread through stagnant pools. Food supplies ran out. When the government finally airdropped supplies, 50 to 60% of it landed in the water. The official death toll, 26,000. Immediate deaths from drowning. But that number is a lie. In the following weeks and months, an estimated 145,000 more died from waterborne disease, famine, and untreated injuries. The heat of August accelerated decomposition, contaminated water supplies, epidemic conditions. 8 members of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, China's highest advisory body, later estimated the true death toll at 230,000. Human Rights Watch confirmed this number in 1995. The Chinese government classified the disaster as a state secret for 2 decades. No public discussion, no accountability, no acknowledgement. It wasn't until 2005, 30 years after the disaster, that official documents were declassified. By then, the dams had been rebuilt, the villages repopulated, the memory buried under concrete. But the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. The dam built to protect became the weapon that destroyed. Chapter 4. The Vajont Dam, Italy 1963, 1630. October 9, 1963. The Piave Valley, northern Italy. The Vajont Dam was a marvel, 262 meters tall, one of the highest in the world. An engineering triumph of post-war Italy, built to harness hydroelectric power for the industrializing north. It stood in a narrow canyon carved by the Vajont River. On one side, Monte Salta. On the other, Monte Toc. Sheer limestone cliffs rising thousands of feet. The dam was beautiful, elegant. A curved concrete arch that seemed to grow from the rock itself. But there was a problem geologists had identified even before construction began. Monte Toc was unstable. The entire northern slope showed signs of ancient landslides. The rock layers, limestone interbedded with clay-like materials, were inclined toward the reservoir. They contained solution caverns that would absorb water. Historical records showed the mountain had moved before. 3 separate experts told the builders, "If you fill this reservoir, the mountain will collapse into it." The warnings were dismissed. Construction began in 1957. By 1959, fractures appeared in the ground during road construction on Monte Toc's slopes. The mountain was already moving. Tests were conducted. Models were built. Scientists calculated that a landslide could generate a wave. But they underestimated, catastrophically, the size of the landslide and the height of the wave. The reservoir began filling in February 1960. Immediately, the mountain began to creep, 1 centimeter per week. Monitoring equipment was installed. Residents of villages along the reservoir were warned to watch for rising water. In September 1963, rainfall intensified. The reservoir was at 700 meters elevation, 82 feet below the dam's crest. Engineers were lowering the water level, slowly. By October 8th, the creep rate had accelerated to 1 meter per day. The entire population of Casso, a village above the reservoir, was evacuated. On October 9th, officials contemplated evacuating Longarone, the town in the valley below. They hesitated. No decision was made. At 10:39 p.m., the mountainside failed. 270 million cubic meters of rock, twice the volume of water in the reservoir, detached from Monte Toc and fell into the lake in 45 seconds. The mass was 1.2 miles wide, a mile deep, moving at 70 miles per hour. The displaced water had nowhere to go but up. A wave 250 meters high, over 800 feet, rose above the dam. It slammed into the town of Casso on the opposite bank, destroying everything up to 760 meters elevation. Then the wave reversed direction and crashed over the dam. The dam itself didn't break. That's the terrible irony. It stood. It still stands today. But 250 meters of water cascading over a dam is a cataract beyond comprehension. The wave fell into the Piave Valley below with apocalyptic force. Longarone was erased, not damaged, not flooded, erased. In 45 seconds, the town of 4,000 people ceased to exist. The clock in the town square stopped at 10:43 p.m. Families were sleeping. They never woke up. 1,900 to 2,500 people died. 487 of them were children. The dam still stands, a monument to hubris. It has never been refilled. The reservoir behind it is a scar filled with rubble and ghosts. In 2008, The United Nations classified the Vajont disaster as the first of the 10 worst disasters caused by human and scientific error in the last 50 years. It wasn't the dam that failed. It was the land that couldn't hold it. March 12, 1928, San Francisco Canyon, California. William Mulholland was a legend, a self-taught engineer who built the Los Angeles Aqueduct, a 230-mile marvel that brought water from the Owens Valley to a city dying of thirst. He saved Los Angeles, made it possible for the city to explode from 100,000 people to over 1 million. By the 1920s, Los Angeles needed more. Another reservoir, another guarantee. Mulholland designed the St. Francis Dam, a concrete gravity arch structure 205 feet tall, 700 feet long, storing enough water to supply Los Angeles for 2 years. He designed it. He supervised construction. He inspected it. No external review, no independent engineers, just Mulholland and absolute confidence. There were signs. Cracks appeared. Leaks. In the days before the collapse, the dam keeper, Tony Harnischfeger, reported muddy water leaking from the western abutment. Troubling, urgent. On the morning of March 12th, the day of the collapse, Mulholland himself inspected the dam. He walked the length of it. He examined the leaks. He declared it safe. He left at noon. At 11:57 p.m., the dam failed. There were no surviving witnesses to the actual collapse. But 10 minutes before midnight, a carpenter named Ace Hopewell rode his motorcycle past the dam. He heard rumbling, stopped, thought it was a landslide. He drove on. 2.5 minutes before midnight, the St. Francis Dam catastrophically failed. 12.4 billion gallons of water, the entire reservoir, emptied in 5 hours. The wall of water was 140 feet high in places. It traveled at 18 miles per hour, but it didn't need speed. It had mass. Unstoppable mass. The dam keeper's cottage, with Tony Harnischfeger, his wife, and their 6-year-old son, was the first to be destroyed. All 3 died instantly. The flood swept through the narrow canyon, widening as it reached the Santa Clara River Valley. Castaic Junction was swept clean as a pool table. A power camp, 84 dead. Fillmore, Bardsdale, Santa Paula. Highway patrol officers Thornton Edwards and Stanley Baker rode motorcycles ahead of the flood, sirens wailing, trying to warn communities. Edwards earned the nickname Paul Revere of the St. Francis flood. Many never received warning. They woke to water smashing through their walls. The flood reached the Pacific Ocean at Ventura at 5:25 a.m., 54 miles, 5.5 hours, over 400 lives. The official death toll was 431, but the real number was certainly higher. Migrant farm workers, many undocumented, were never counted. Bodies were never recovered. Some washed out to sea. Within days, Mulholland faced a coroner's inquest. He was asked what happened. His response became legendary. "Don't blame anyone else. The only one to blame is me." When asked how he felt, he said, "I envy the dead." Investigations revealed the foundation was flawed. The western abutment sat on cesp sandstone, soft, weak rock that dissolved under pressure. The eastern side was anchored to schist that fractured easily. Mulholland had built a dam on ground that couldn't hold it. He hadn't consulted geologists, hadn't tested the foundation thoroughly, hadn't allowed external review. He had built on faith and experience, and it killed 431 people. Mulholland never worked again. He died in 1935, a broken man, haunted by the voices of those he couldn't save. The disaster fundamentally changed American engineering law. Independent review became mandatory. Geological surveys required. Safety factors increased. Multiple engineers, multiple checks, multiple layers of accountability. One man could no longer sign his name to a structure that held back billions of gallons of water. Sometimes, the price of progress is written in water. You'd think we learned. You'd think after Johnstown, after Vajont, after St. Francis, after Banqiao, after centuries of failures, we'd have figured it out. We haven't. February 2017, Oroville Dam, California. the tallest dam in the United States, 770 feet of earth and rock, part of the California State Water Project, supplying 23 million people. After 5 years of drought, atmospheric rivers dumped unprecedented rainfall on Northern California. Lake Oroville filled rapidly. Operators opened the main spillway to release water. On February 7th, a hole appeared in the spillway. A crater 250 feet long, 30 feet deep. The concrete simply disintegrated, revealing that the spillway was anchored to weathered rock, not bedrock. Engineers stopped the release, but the lake kept rising. On February 11th, water began flowing over the emergency spillway for the first time in the dam's history. Within hours, the hillside beneath it started eroding. Headward erosion, chewing toward the concrete weir at a rate of 30 feet per hour. If the emergency spillway collapsed, a 30-foot wall of water would crash into the Feather River Valley below. On February 12th, at 4:45 p.m., authorities issued an evacuation order. 188,000 people. 188,000 people told to leave their homes immediately because a dam might fail. Roads gridlocked. Gas stations ran out of fuel. Families fled with whatever they could grab. Shelters overflowed. Pets weren't allowed in emergency centers, so people slept outside with their dogs. The dam didn't fail. Engineers released water through the damaged main spillway at maximum capacity, 100,000 cubic feet per second, ripping an even larger crater but lowering the lake level just enough. The emergency spillway never collapsed, but it came close, terrifyingly close. Repairs cost $1.1 billion, and the dam is still considered at risk. May 2020, Edenville and Sanford Dams, Michigan. Heavy rainfall. 2 dams on the same river system. Both privately owned, both with known maintenance issues, both failed within hours of each other. 10,000 people evacuated. The town of Midland, population 42,000, partly underwater. Estimated damages, $200 million. No deaths, this time. September 2023, Derna, Libya, storm. Daniel, a Mediterranean cyclone, stalled over northeastern Libya. 400 millimeters of rain in 24 hours. 2 dams upstream from the city of Derna, the Bou Mansour Dam and the El Bilad Dam, both built in the 1970s, both unmaintained since 2002, both damaged by previous floods, both sitting in a country torn apart by civil war where infrastructure had become invisible. The dams weren't just neglected, they were forgotten. On the night of September 10th, the dams failed. 30 million cubic meters of water surged into Derna. Entire neighborhoods swept into the Mediterranean Sea. Bridges, buildings, roads, people, families sleeping. Official death toll, over 5,900. Unofficial estimates, 11,000 to 20,000. 44,000 displaced. 250,000 in need of humanitarian assistance. 1/4 of the city erased. Survivors described hearing 2 explosions, the dams bursting, before the water arrived. Videos show cars floating, buildings collapsing. The sea turned brown with debris and bodies. Rescue workers arrived days later. Bodies were found 100 kilometers downstream, washing up on beaches, trapped in rubble. So many unidentified they had to be buried in mass graves. The United Nations said most casualties could have been avoided if the dams had been maintained, if early warning systems existed, if authorities had evacuated the city. But they didn't, because infrastructure is invisible until it kills you. We keep rebuilding the same walls, expecting water to obey. Water doesn't hate us. It doesn't think. It doesn't plan revenge. It doesn't remember our names, but it remembers physics. Every dam ever built is a wager. We're betting that our concrete will outlast our assumptions, that our models capture reality, that the rain we've seen is the worst rain that will ever fall, that maintenance will happen, that warnings will be heeded, that people will care. We lose those bets more often than we admit. The Johnstown Dam failed because wealthy men wanted fish more than they wanted safety. The Banqiao Dam failed because engineers underestimated nature, and politicians suppressed warnings. The Vajont Dam failed because builders ignored geologists and assumed mountains were stable. The St. Francis Dam failed because one brilliant man believed his experience could replace expertise. Oroville nearly failed because inspectors looked at a dam and didn't walk on it. Derna failed because war destroys not just cities but the invisible systems that keep them alive. Every disaster has a different cause, but every disaster has the same root. We forgot. We forgot that rivers existed before us and will exist after us. We forgot that water carved the valleys we now inhabit. We forgot that 1,000-year floods don't mean you're safe for 1,000 years. They mean you have a 1 in 1,000 chance every single year. We forgot that dam's age. Concrete cracks, earth settles, seals degrade, metal corrodes, rain patterns change, storms intensify. We forgot that maintenance is expensive, but collapse is catastrophic. We forgot that invisible infrastructure only becomes visible when it fails. We live behind walls of concrete. We build homes in floodplains. We trust engineers will never meet, and regulations will never read. We assume someone is checking, someone is maintaining, someone is watching the cracks, until the moment they aren't. There are 87,000 dams in China, most built in the 1950s through 1970s with outdated standards. 70% of America's dams are over 50 years old. Thousands worldwide need repairs they'll never receive, because dams are boring until they break. Climate change is rewriting the rules faster than we can adapt. The 100-year flood is now a 10-year flood. The 1,000-year storm happens twice a century. The safety margins we designed into our infrastructure are evaporating, and we're still building, still assuming, still betting. Water doesn't negotiate. It doesn't accept excuses. It doesn't pause because you weren't ready. It just flows. When the Johnstown flood survivors rebuilt their city, they put a plaque on the hillside. It reads, "May this never happen again." But it did happen again. In 1936, in 1977. Different causes, same water. Because water never forgets what gravity taught it. We built 10,000 promises in concrete and earth, and every one of them is waiting, not maliciously, just patiently, for the day when our assumptions meet reality. You can't control what was here long before you. You can only respect it, or drown trying.